What if the most famous food city in the world has been hiding origin stories so wild, so strange, so wonderfully improbable that even the people who live there have stopped questioning them? What if the dishes that built New York's reputation as a culinary capital weren't invented by celebrity chefs in white tablecloth restaurants, but by accident, by immigrants, by tired bartenders working a Sunday afternoon shift, by a man with a cigar and a chip on his shoulder, and by one very specific waiter who was apparently having the worst day of his life? What if New York didn't just feed America, it quietly fed the entire planet, and most of us have been eating its inventions our whole lives without ever once asking where they came from? Hi, my name is David, and this is Food Origins, the show where we pull back the curtain on the foods you grew up eating and find out they came from somewhere you never expected. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe, because today we are going all in on New York City. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will never look at your lunch the same way again. Food number 1, buffalo wings. Let's start with the one that almost ate the country. Buffalo wings are now so embedded in American food culture that they have their own holiday weekend, their own sports rituals, their own entire franchise of restaurants that exist exclusively to serve them. Every Super Bowl Sunday, Americans consume an estimated 1.45 billion chicken wings. Read that number again, 1.45 billion, in a single weekend. And every single one of them owes a debt to a small Italian-American bar in upstate New York called the Anchor Bar. The year was 1964. The city was Buffalo, New York, which, yes, I know is technically not New York City, but stay with me, because the story has too many fingerprints from the entire state to leave it out. A woman named Teresa Bellissimo was working late at the Anchor Bar when her son Dominic showed up with a group of hungry friends asking for a snack. Teresa looked at what she had. She had a pile of chicken wings, which at that point in American cooking were considered scrap meat, the part of the chicken you threw into a stock pot or fed to the dog. Nobody ate chicken wings. They were structurally inconvenient, mostly bone, and considered unworthy of a real meal. Teresa deep-fried them, tossed them in a sauce she improvised from melted butter and hot sauce, and served them with celery and blue cheese dressing, because that's what she had on hand to cool down the heat. She gave them to her son and his friends, fully expecting to be teased for serving them scraps. They lost their minds. Within a year, the Anchor Bar was famous. Within a decade, buffalo wings were spreading across the American Northeast. By the 1990s, they were the unofficial food of professional sports in America, of college dorm rooms, of every dive bar from Maine to California. And it all started because a woman with limited ingredients and a hungry kid made a snap decision that should have been forgotten by Tuesday, and instead became one of the most consumed foods in the country. Teresa Bellissimo never trademarked the recipe. She never franchised the concept. She made the wings. The world took it from there. Food number 2, the bagel. Now, I have to be careful here, because the bagel did not originate in New York. The bagel is genuinely, anciently, Eastern European. Most credible food historians trace it to the Jewish communities of Poland in the 1600s, where it appears in written records under the name bagel. There is a famous regulation from 1610 in Krakow that mentions bagels as a customary gift to women after childbirth. The bagel is old. The bagel is real. Poland gets the foundational credit. But what happened to the bagel after it crossed the Atlantic and landed on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in the late 1800s is one of the most extraordinary culinary transformations in American history. Because what we now call a New York bagel, that specific, dense, chewy, glossy-crusted, slightly sweet, perfectly hand-rolled, kettle-boiled, then oven-baked masterpiece, was developed and perfected almost entirely by Jewish immigrant bakers in New York City. The Polish bagel was good. The New York bagel was transcendent. And the difference comes down to one specific ingredient that nobody outside New York seems to fully understand: the water. New York City tap water, drawn from the Catskill and Delaware watersheds, has a particular mineral composition, soft, slightly acidic, low in calcium, that interacts with bread dough in a way that bakers around the world have spent decades trying to replicate. There are bagel shops in Los Angeles that ship in New York water by the tanker truck because they cannot reproduce the texture any other way. There are scientists who have written papers on this. The water is the secret. The water has always been the secret. In 1907, the Bagel Bakers of New York actually formed a union, the International Bagel Bakers Union Local 338, which dictated the terms of every bagel produced in Manhattan for the next 60 years. They controlled who learned the trade, they controlled the recipes, they controlled the shops. If you wanted to be a bagel baker in New York, you had to know someone, and that someone had to vouch for you. And even then, you spent years apprenticing before you ever rolled a bagel of your own. The bagel, as the world now knows it, the schmear, the lox, the everything seasoning, the Sunday morning ritual, all of it was built brick by brick, ring by ring, in tenement bakeries in the Lower East Side, by people who had brought a recipe from Poland and turned it into something only New York could have made. Food number 3, New York-style pizza. Let's get straight to the part that's going to upset people, because honesty matters on this channel, and I would rather tell you the complicated truth than the clean lie. Pizza is Italian. Specifically, pizza, as we recognize it, comes from Naples, where it was being sold by street vendors and pizzerias for centuries before any of it crossed the Atlantic. Pizza Margherita, the foundational tomato mozzarella basil pie, was named in 1889 after Queen Margherita of Savoy on her visit to Naples. The roots are deep. The roots are real. Naples gets to keep them. But New York-style pizza, the foldable, wide, thin-crusted, slightly crispy on the underside, gently chewy in the middle, sold by the slice for $2 on a paper plate that doubles as a structural support, eaten while walking down 8th Avenue at 1 in the morning, is its own invention. The story begins in 1905 with a man named Gennaro Lombardi, who opened what is widely considered the first licensed pizzeria in the United States on Spring Street in Manhattan. Lombardi's, which still exists today and still serves pizza out of a coal-fired oven, is the foundational establishment from which most of New York pizza culture descends. But here is what made New York pizza diverge from its Neapolitan ancestor: the ovens, the water, the flour, and the sheer specific genius of selling pizza by the slice. Before New York, pizza was sold whole. You ordered a pie, you sat down, you ate it. The concept of slicing a pizza into 8 pieces and selling them individually to anyone walking past was a New York innovation, driven by the city's lunchtime workforce, the working-class immigrants and office workers who needed something fast, cheap, filling, and possible to eat in 15 minutes between shifts. The slice was born from the same logic that built New York itself: density, speed, volume. By the 1950s, every neighborhood in the 5 boroughs had a corner slice shop. By the 1980s, the dollar slice had become a citywide institution. By the 2010s, the New York slice was being imitated in cities across the world, often badly, always with reverence. And here's the thing that genuinely separates New York pizza from every other pizza on earth: the fold. The specific physical technique of folding a slice in half lengthwise so that the structural integrity holds together while you eat it walking down the street. That fold is the entire reason the New York slice has its proportions. Wide enough to fold, thin enough to bend, crisp enough to hold its shape, soft enough to give. The whole thing was engineered, accidentally and brilliantly, around the act of eating it while moving. That is not a pizza. That is a delivery system for happiness designed by a city that never stops walking. Food number 4, the Reuben sandwich. I need to warn you, this one has 2 competing origin stories, both of which involve people named Reuben, both of which are passionately defended by their adherents, and both of which place the sandwich's invention firmly in the early 20th century. Food historians have been arguing about this for nearly 100 years, and they are not stopping anytime soon. The New York claim, which I find the more compelling of the two, points to a man named Arnold Reuben, the owner of Reuben's Delicatessen on East 58th Street in Manhattan. According to the story, sometime around 1914, an actress named Annette Selos walked into Reuben's late at night and asked for something substantial. Arnold, ever the showman, took what he had on hand: corned beef, Swiss cheese, sauerkraut, and Russian dressing, layered them between 2 slices of rye bread, grilled the whole thing, and named it after her: the Annette Selos sandwich, which, I will admit, is a worse name. So they renamed it after Arnold himself. The competing claim comes from Omaha, Nebraska, where a grocer named Reuben Kulikovsky reportedly invented a similar sandwich during a poker game in the 1920s. The Omaha people will fight you over this. The New York people will fight back. I am not going to settle it on YouTube. What I will tell you is this. Whatever the precise moment of invention, the Reuben sandwich as a cultural icon, as a deli staple, as the thing that defines the American Jewish deli experience for millions of people, was built in New York. It spread from the Manhattan delicatessens of the 1920s and 1930s outward into the country. Katz's, Carnegie, The Stage, the Second Avenue Deli, these establishments turned the Reuben into something approaching a religion. And what makes the Reuben work, what makes it transcendent rather than just a sandwich, is the engineering. The rye bread provides structure, the corned beef provides richness, the sauerkraut provides acid, the Swiss cheese provides fat, the Russian dressing provides sweetness and tang, and the grilling, the critical step, melts the cheese into the kraut, softens the bread just enough, and produces a single coherent thing that is greater than the sum of its parts. It's a 5-ingredient sandwich. There are master chefs who couldn't engineer something that balanced if you gave them a month. Arnold Reuben did it for an actress at midnight in 1914 and named it after a customer. New York food history in a single bite. Food number 5, Eggs Benedict. I want you to picture this. It's a Saturday morning, sometime around 1894. The place is the Waldorf Hotel on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. A wealthy stockbroker named Lemuel Benedict, who had spent the previous evening, shall we say, exercising his constitutional right to overdo it, walks into the dining room with a hangover so severe it has its own zip code. He orders something specific: buttered toast, crispy bacon, 2 poached eggs, and a small pitcher of hollandaise sauce on the side. He assembles it himself at the table, layering the components on the toast and pouring the hollandaise over the top. The maitre d', a man named Oscar Tschirky, who is one of the most quietly important figures in American culinary history and who almost nobody knows about, watches this happen. He is intrigued. He asks Lemuel about the dish. He goes back to the kitchen, refines the concept, swaps the toast for an English muffin, swaps the bacon for Canadian bacon, and puts it on the menu. That is the story of how Eggs Benedict was born. A hungover stockbroker, an attentive maitre d', and a hotel that was willing to put a hangover cure on its breakfast menu. Now, like all the best food origin stories, there is a competing version. A different account credits a Mrs. LeGrand Benedict, who supposedly complained that the Delmonico's menu was boring and inspired the chef there to create the dish. Delmonico's, which was the most important restaurant in 19th century New York and which arguably invented the entire concept of American fine dining, has its own claim to the Benedict. Either way, the dish was born in New York. Either way, it was born in a luxury Manhattan dining room, born from privilege and excess and the specific Gilded Age culture of the late 1800s, when New York's wealthy elite were eating their way through a culinary revolution that the rest of the country was still decades away from understanding. Eggs Benedict is now on the brunch menu of every hotel, restaurant, and bistro from Sydney to Stockholm. It is the dish that defines weekend brunch culture across the entire English-speaking world. And it started as a hangover order from a man whose last name happened to be Benedict. New York has always been generous like that. It takes someone's worst morning and turns it into the world's favorite breakfast. Food number 6, cheesecake, New York style. Okay, like the bagel, I have to be honest. Cheesecake is ancient. The Greeks were eating a version of cheesecake at the original Olympic Games. The Romans wrote down recipes. Cheesecake as a basic concept, sweet cheese, a crust, the ritual of slicing and serving, predates almost every other dessert in this video by literally thousands of years. But New York-style cheesecake, that specific, dense, towering, almost architectural slab of cream cheese, eggs, sugar, and vanilla, baked on a graham cracker crust until it sets into something that has the structural integrity of a small building, is its own invention. The foundational ingredient is cream cheese, and cream cheese as we know it was invented in 1872 in upstate New York by a dairyman named William Lawrence, who was trying to reproduce a French soft cheese called Neufchâtel, and accidentally created something denser, richer, and more stable. He called it Philadelphia cream cheese, even though it had nothing to do with Philadelphia. because Philadelphia at the time was associated with high-quality dairy, and he wanted his product to seem premium. American marketing in the 19th century was just as cynical as it is now. The cream cheese went south to New York City, where Jewish immigrant bakers and German immigrant bakers in the early 20th century began using it as the base for what would become the New York cheesecake. The most important figure here is a man named Arnold Reuben, the same Arnold Reuben from the Sandwich Story, who claimed to have served the first New York cheesecake at his delicatessen sometime in the 1920s. Whether Arnold actually invented it or just popularized it, the result is the same. By the 1940s, New York cheesecake had become a citywide institution. Junior's, which opened in Brooklyn in 1950 and is still operating today, made the cheesecake its signature dish and turned it into a tourist pilgrimage. Lindy's on Broadway did the same. The recipe spread outward through American food culture and eventually back to Europe, where bakers who had inherited the original cheesecake tradition from antiquity were now learning the New York version and adopting it. New York took a 5,000-year-old dessert and made it taller, denser, richer, and somehow more itself. That is genuinely one of the most impressive things any city has ever done with a recipe. Food number 7, the hot dog. Stay with me because this story has more layers than the toppings on a Chicago dog, and at least one of them involves Coney Island and a German immigrant who probably had no idea what he was starting. The sausage in a bun, the foundational concept, is European. Frankfurt and Vienna both claim the underlying sausage, the Frankfurter, the Wiener. Germany has its bratwurst. Austria has its specific sausage traditions. The meat product itself is not American. But the American hot dog, the specific format of a steamed or boiled sausage served in a soft, split-top bun with mustard and condiments and eaten in 3 bites while standing in a crowd, was developed in New York City in the late 1800s. The origin story most credibly points to a German immigrant named Charles Feltman, who began selling sausages from a pushcart on Coney Island in 1867. Feltman's innovation was specifically the bun. Before Feltman, sausages were sold wrapped in paper or held with a piece of bread. The dedicated bun, baked specifically to cradle a sausage and be eaten with one hand, was a Feltman invention designed to solve the very practical problem of feeding huge crowds of beachgoers quickly and without utensils. Feltman built an empire. By the 1920s, Feltman's Ocean Pavilion on Coney Island was one of the largest restaurants in the world, serving millions of hot dogs every summer. He had employees, expansion plans, the works. Then, in 1916, one of his employees, a Polish immigrant named Nathan Handwerker, decided to open his own stand directly across the street. He charged 5 cents for a hot dog. Feltman charged 10. Nathan undercut his old boss and created what would become one of the most famous food brands in American history, Nathan's Famous, which still hosts its hot dog eating contest every 4th of July on Coney Island, became the cultural anchor of the New York hot dog. And from Coney Island, the hot dog spread to baseball stadiums, to street vendors across Manhattan, to every American summer cookout. The dirty water dog, the soubrette cart on the corner, the silver wagons parked outside Central Park, all of them descend directly from Charles Feltman's original innovation on a Brooklyn beach in 1867. The most American food in the world was invented by a German immigrant on the coast of Brooklyn to feed people who had come to swim in the ocean. That is the entire history of New York, condensed into a single sentence. Food number 8, the potato chip. This one is going to surprise people, because the potato chip is so deeply associated with mass-produced American snack food that the actual origin story feels almost too charming to believe. The year is 1853. The place is Saratoga Springs, New York, a resort town in the Adirondacks, where wealthy Manhattanites went to take the waters in the summer. The restaurant is Moon's Lake House. The chef is a man named George Crum, who was of African American and Native American descent, and who was widely regarded as one of the most talented chefs in upstate New York. A wealthy customer, possibly the railroad magnate Cornelius Vanderbilt, though the historical record is murky on this, complained that his French fried potatoes were too thick and too soggy. He sent them back. Crum, irritated, decided to teach the customer a lesson. He sliced potatoes paper thin, fried them until they were unbearably crispy, and salted them aggressively, fully expecting the customer to send them back again in disgust. The customer loved them. Crum put the chips on the menu under the name Saratoga chips. They became the signature dish of the resort. Vacationing New Yorkers brought the recipe back to the city. Within decades, Saratoga chips had become a citywide snack, sold in restaurants and grocery stores across the 5 boroughs. By the early 1900s, factories were mass-producing them. By the 1920s, the potato chip was a national American snack. By the 1950s, it was a global phenomenon. And here is the part of the story that historians have only relatively recently begun to properly acknowledge. The contribution of George Crum and his sister Catherine Wicks, who also worked at Moon's Lake House, and who some accounts credit with the actual invention, has been minimized for over a century. The chip was assigned to wealthy white industrialists in early retellings. The black and indigenous chef who actually invented it, born in 1824 in New York's Hudson Valley, was treated as a footnote. George Crum eventually opened his own restaurant in Saratoga, where the chips were placed on every table in a basket as a complimentary offering. He ran that restaurant for over 30 years. He never received a patent. He never received royalties. The chip industry he accidentally created is now worth tens of billions of dollars globally. And it started because one annoyed chef in upstate New York wanted to make a point to a rude customer. Spite, as a culinary technique, is criminally underrated. Food number 9, the egg cream. This one is going to bewilder anyone who has never lived in New York because it has no eggs, no cream, and yet manages to be one of the most beloved drinks in the city's history. The New York egg cream is a chocolate soda fountain drink made from 3 ingredients: cold milk, seltzer water, and chocolate syrup. Specifically, Fox's You Bet chocolate syrup, which is non-negotiable in the eyes of every purist who has ever ordered one. The drink is layered carefully so that a thick white foam rises to the top, giving the appearance of cream even though there is no cream involved. The egg cream was born in the Jewish neighborhoods of Brooklyn and the Lower East Side in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The exact inventor is disputed, but the most credible attribution points to a man named Louis Oster, who ran a candy shop in the Lower East Side and who claimed to have invented the drink sometime around 1890. The origin of the name is also contested. Some accounts suggest the original recipe did include eggs, which were eventually removed for cost reasons. Other accounts suggest the name comes from the Yiddish word echt, meaning genuine or real. So an echt cream was a genuine cream-style drink. Other accounts say it was named for the egg-shaped foam that rises to the top. Nobody knows. Everyone has an opinion. What is not disputed is that the egg cream became the defining drink of the New York soda fountain era. Every candy store, every luncheonette, every corner shop in the 5 boroughs served them for a nickel, then a dime, then a quarter through the first half of the 20th century. Generations of New Yorkers grew up on them. The drink itself nearly died out as the soda fountain culture collapsed in the 1960s and 1970s. But it has had a quiet, stubborn resurgence in recent decades, kept alive by old-school diners and Jewish delis, and the kind of New Yorkers who refuse to let the city forget what it used to be. The egg cream is not just a drink. It is a memory, served cold, in a glass, with no eggs and no cream, and absolutely no apologies for either omission. Only New York could invent a drink whose name lies about both its ingredients and somehow make it a cultural institution. Food number 10, the black and white cookie. We end with something small, sweet, and quietly perfect. The black and white cookie. That round, soft, cake-like cookie, frosted half in vanilla and half in chocolate, sitting in the window of every Jewish bakery and corner deli in Manhattan for over 100 years. The black and white cookie was developed in New York City in the early 20th century, most credibly by Glazer's Bake Shop on the Upper East Side, which opened in 1902 and continued serving them until it finally closed in 2018, ending one of the longest continuous runs of any bakery in the city's history. The cookie itself is a piece of beautiful engineering. The base is closer to a small flat cake than a traditional cookie, soft and slightly lemony. The frosting is divided precisely down the middle, vanilla on one side, chocolate on the other, applied so that the two flavors never touch, but both remain visible at every angle. Jerry Seinfeld famously called the black and white cookie a symbol of racial harmony in a 1994 episode of Seinfeld, in a bit that has been quoted so many times it has become its own cultural shorthand. "Look to the cookie," he said. The cookie became a New York icon because a New York comedian put it on television. That is the most New York sentence I have ever written. But long before Seinfeld, the black and white cookie was already the defining sweet of the New York bakery counter. It was the cookie your grandmother brought home from the deli. It was the cookie you ate after temple. It was the cookie that sat in a stack on the counter at the Carnegie Deli next to the Rugula and the Hamantaschen, quietly waiting to be discovered by tourists who would carry the memory home with them. The black and white cookie has never gone global the way the bagel or the pizza slice has. It has stubbornly, almost defiantly, remained a New York thing. And that is part of why it matters. Some inventions conquer the world. Some inventions stay home and become a city's secret handshake. The black and white cookie is the second kind, and the city loves it more for that. 10 foods, 1 city, and a story that most people have walked past their entire lives without ever stopping to notice it was there. New York did not just feed America. It invented the way America thinks about lunch, about brunch, about snacking, about what a sandwich can be, what a slice of pizza can do, what a hangover cure looks like when it is plated by a Swiss maitre d' in a Fifth Avenue hotel in 1894. From a woman in Buffalo, improvising for her son's hungry friends, to a black chef in Saratoga Springs annoyed by a rude customer. From a Brooklyn beachfront sausage vendor to a Lower East Side candy shop with a drink that contains neither egg nor cream. From an Upper East Side bakery to a Coney Island stand started in spite. New York's food history is not one story. It is 10,000 stories, layered like the components of a Reuben, balanced like the foam on top of an egg cream. And every single one of them traces back to immigrants, accidents, hunger, and the specific genius of a city that has always understood that the best things happen when you give people the wrong ingredients and just see what they come back with. I'm David. This is Food Origins. If this changed the way you see your next slice, your next bagel, or that hot dog you grabbed last week without thinking, hit that like button and subscribe, because we have stories exactly like this one lined up for cities and cuisines that are going to completely rearrange the way you see your plate. Tell me in the comments which one of these 10 surprised you the most. I have a feeling the potato chip is going to win, but the egg cream might be the dark horse. And if you grew up in New York, tell me what I missed, because I know you have opinions, and I want to hear all of them.